Dante Moore is not entering the NFL draft, and it's not time for despair, Jets fans. It's not time for panic. The Jets can rebuild their team without Dante Moore, and we will discuss how today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, January 15th, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. On today's show, we are talking about some surprising news. Oregon quarterback Dante Moore, the consensus #2 quarterback in this year's class, is not entering the NFL draft. He made the announcement yesterday. This has sent shockwaves through the Jets fan base, a fan base who figured Moore would be a likely selection for the Jets with the second overall pick. We'll talk about all the implications on today's show. We'll talk about why the Jets should not force a quarterback pick in the aftermath of Moore staying in school. We'll talk about some of the alternatives the Jets could go with the second overall pick. But we will begin by talking about the big implications. And I think it's fair to say this is a fan base in a state of shock right now, and a fan base who, for a couple of days last week, thought the future was set. When the Jets lost to the Buffalo Bills in Week 18 to secure the second overall pick, I think there were lots of Jets fans who were very confident about the future because it seemed like with that second pick, they would draft Dante Moore out of Oregon. Then came Friday night, the Peach Bowl, a game where Moore played quite poorly. If you look at the numbers, I don't think they accurately describe how much Moore struggled because there was a bit of stat padding after the game got out of hand. It was a really, really ugly performance. I think a lot of Jets fans kind of looked past this. They talked themselves into the idea this was just one game. We'll still get Dante Moore. We'll be okay. Well, Moore announced yesterday he's not entering the NFL draft. It was a bit of a surprise. Whenever a player is that likely to go in the top 2, he's turning down a ton of guaranteed money to return to school. And personally, I think that it's a good decision for Moore because what we saw in that Peach Bowl game Friday night suggested that he's a guy with a lot of talent. And I've been going through his film the last couple of days. I've really started to do a deep dive. You see throws that are really special, but you also see a lot of moments where his inexperience shines through. And I think 20 starts is not enough to prepare a quarterback for the NFL. If you look historically, quarterbacks who have as few starts as Dante Moore typically struggle once they get to the NFL. You have to master college defenses. I don't think Moore has quite done that yet. But in the bigger picture, it leads to the question, what happens now with the New York Jets franchise? And I go back to a thought that I've had a lot over the last couple of years. The New York Jets too frequently are waiting for some sort of magical salvation to appear for them. And frequently it takes the form of one player that they think will magically turn the fate of the franchise around. The Jets sit around just hoping for good luck, hoping for essentially the player who will change everything to fall out of the sky. And there have been so many false starts with this approach. You look at any of the quarterbacks the Jets have drafted high over the last 2 decades, and we could probably go back even further. And there's always this moment where you believe that this quarterback is going to make everything all right. It's great if that happens. Occasionally it does. Occasionally you do get a quarterback who's a generational prospect. I hate that term because I think it's so overused. Yes, you do see instances where it happens. But more often, success in the NFL is just about doing things the right way. It's about doing the little things. It's about doing the things that kind of fly under the radar. You know, we talk a lot about tanking around the Jets because we have to get the quarterback. And don't get me wrong, the New York Jets, if they want to go anywhere, need to get a quarterback. But I think that the discussion misses the mark in many ways because, and I'm not sure the Jets are the only team where this applies, but too often we talk about a team that's rebuilding. And the rebuild essentially is just get the quarterback. And then people think that's the end of the rebuild. And far too often, that's the way the New York Jets have functioned as a franchise. where they think that you just draft a quarterback, or in the case of Aaron Rodgers, you just trade for a quarterback and everything will magically fall into place. So they don't go about the hard work of hitting on their draft picks, developing players, bringing in coaches who have innovative schemes and can develop those players, focusing on the little things, managing your cap well. These are the things that help build a winning team. I'll say this. I think Dante Moore could have a bright future in the NFL. If the Jets drafted him, there's a chance he could have been a very good player. By going back to school, Moore has essentially taken a lot of the value out of the number 2 pick, because even if the Jets did not pick Moore, some team likely would have traded up for him. Jets are going to have a tough time trading down from the number 2 pick right now. But you can always recover from the player you don't get. That's true in any sport. It doesn't matter. It's never the case that missing out on one player sinks your franchise. You can always recover. And the great franchises in this league typically just do really smart things over and over. Did the Kansas City Chiefs ever tank for a quarterback? No, they didn't. Andy Reid inherited the number 1 overall pick the year he took the job, but they drafted a tackle, Eric Fisher. And they did not tank after that. They started winning. They put together winning season after winning season until they finally had a losing season in 2025. Think about the other franchises. Did the Philadelphia Eagles ever tank for a quarterback? Did the Baltimore Ravens ever tank for a quarterback? Did the Buffalo Bills tank for a quarterback? Look at the successful franchises in this league. Yeah, look, they get the quarterback right. But these aren't teams that said, oh, well, if we don't get the number 1 or number 2 pick, we're finished. We're sunk. They go out, they build in the trenches. They get star players. They get difference-making players. They develop talent. That's what the Jets have to do. Yeah, it would be great if Dante Moore stepped in and was immediately the greatest quarterback in the history of the league. I don't think that was going to happen, though. I think that if Dante Moore was drafted by the Jets and succeeded, and by the way, he'll be in the NFL draft in 2027. Jets have 3 first-round picks. Very well may end up a member of the New York Jets when all is said and done. But if he succeeded, it was going to require the Jets to put the right pieces around him. It was going to require the Jets to get an awful lot right. This was not a case where one player was going to change everything. So if you're sitting there thinking that everything's ruined now, well, if the plan was that Dante Moore was going to be the salvation of the franchise and that was all that mattered, the plan wasn't going to work anyway. I mean, I was really frustrated with the way the Jets ended the season with the 5 straight losses by 23 plus points. And the most frequent response I got was, well, the Jets were losing those games on purpose to try and get a better draft pick. I hope that wasn't true, because if your entire plan involved tanking for Dante Moore, it was a terrible plan to begin with. He's a guy who's a good prospect. He's a guy who may be a good quarterback in the league in the future. He may have done very well for the Jets, but that's not the only piece of the puzzle that matters. When I express reservation about the Jets drafting a quarterback, it's not that I think that the Jets can afford to never get a quarterback. I fully acknowledge, I follow the NFL, that the Jets are eventually going to have to hit on a quarterback. My reservation is that the quarterback is not the only piece of the puzzle. And for far too long, the New York Jets have operated acting as though all they have to do is draft a quarterback, that they don't have to develop him, that they don't need to put the pieces around the quarterback. Once they get the quarterback, everything's fine. We saw that to an extreme when they traded for a veteran quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and they pretty much did nothing else to upgrade the roster for that first year. The attitude of this franchise has to change. The Jets are not a losing team because they've gotten unlucky at the quarterback position. The New York Jets are a losing team, and they have been a losing team because they have not done the things that are required for a team to be successful. So whether or not Dante Moore entered this draft, whether or not the Jets picked him, the Jets were going to have to do these things anyway. Does it make it trickier without a quarterback who's as obvious at number 2? Well, yeah, it does. Would it have been better even if the Jets weren't picking a quarterback to have the number 2 pick with a lot of value for a team that wanted to trade up for more? Of course it would have. Is the franchise sunk now because Dante Moore went back to school? Well, if that's the case, we didn't have the right people in charge anyway. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, the Jets still do own that number 2 pick. and it's not really clear that there's a quarterback worth taking. Trading down also got a lot trickier. The value of a trade down went down. So where can the Jets go? Who should they pick? I have a few early thoughts on this, and I'll give them to you continuing here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled QUO, the smarter way to run your business communication. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number with Quo, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's quo.com/lockedonnfl. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Hey guys, the draft pick positions are set, and so many teams like the Jets are searching for their franchise quarterback. Have you ever wished to become a pro quarterback getting drafted first or second overall by the Jets? Well, now you can. There's a mobile game just for you called Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a #1 draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness to help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the #1 QB career mode game on the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. Sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry, and evolve your teammates. Give input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a QB career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, and works 100% offline. Perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something special just for you guys. Use the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store to get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB Football Legend, QB1. It's your legacy. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Go to lockedonnyjets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. On today's show, we are focused on some relatively surprising news. Dante Moore, the Oregon quarterback who many people expected to be the second overall pick by the New York Jets, is not entering the 2026 NFL draft. He's returning to school for another year, and this has pretty much thrown the Jets' draft strategy into chaos. I think most of us assumed that the Jets would either pick Moore or they would trade down, and some team would give the Jets a lot to move up for him. Well, now, with only really one consensus elite quarterback in this class, that's Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana, who is likely to go #1 overall to the Raiders. This #2 pick takes on an entirely different shape for the New York Jets. And I'm going to give you my initial thoughts on the Jets' options with this pick. And they could very well change. Again, I'm in surprise mode right now. I was not expecting Moore to return to school. In the back of my mind, I always knew that it was a possibility that maybe Moore would not be an option for the Jets. But I thought at the end of the day, he was looking at a lot of guaranteed money that he'd be giving up by going back to Oregon. So my initial thought is that there are kind of like two paths the Jets could go with this pick. #1, I'm not sure this would be the most popular path. In fact, I'm not sure either of these would be the most popular path. But I think a lot of Jets fans are focused on the offensive side of the ball. If you're not taking a quarterback, though, you have to look at what's available. Is there really a wide receiver worthy of the second overall pick in this year's class? Is there really a pass catcher or a skill player who you'd feel good about picking 2 overall? I'm not sure about that. I don't think the answer is really yes to that question. So you may have to look to the defensive side of the ball. And Rueben Bain out of Miami, the pass rusher, the edge guy, he's He's a guy who's very high on a lot of draft boards right now. Now, one thing you have to admit with the Jets defense, this personnel is horrible. The Jets defense might be the worst I've ever seen a Jets defense be in terms of talent. It's just really, really bad. I've seen a lot of bad Jets teams. I've seen a lot of Jets teams that have looked hopeless. I've covered them. I'm not sure I've ever seen a defense look as dismal as the New York Jets do right now on their defensive roster. And other than quarterback, the most valuable position on the field is probably edge rusher, because edge rushers do more to impact quarterbacks than any other player. They are the guys who tend to get the most pressures. They're the guys who tend to get the most hits and the most sacks. Yes, it obviously helps to have a great defensive tackle, but defensive tackles have to work through traffic. Defensive tackles deal with a lot of double teams. Even when they're single teamed, there's a lot they have to go through. They're working through a very messy situation. Edge guys, they have a lot of space to work with, so it's easier for them to get to the quarterback. And one thing we know, and this is pretty much common sense, this is obvious. When a quarterback's under pressure, he gets a lot less accurate. He makes a lot more mistakes. He becomes a lot less effective. And you look at the defensive end spot right now for the Jets, there are a couple of recent first-round draft picks, Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson, but neither of them are really guys you can trust at this point. Jermaine simply did not look like himself this year. He suffered that Achilles injury, and sometimes when you suffer an Achilles injury, it's a career-altering injury. That very well may have been the case for Jermaine last year. Now, my personal view is that, his production seemed to go down. This is just anecdotal. This is just on the eyeball test. I felt like he wasn't as productive after Quinnen Williams got traded, so maybe there's something to that. The Jets season obviously went sideways. There are lots of guys who didn't play well, but you have to be worried about Jermaine. And as far as Will McDonald goes, McDonald is a guy I defended from day one. Everybody else hated that pick. I may have been the only person who defended that pick, or at least the only person who said, let's keep an open mind about Will McDonald. I really liked his year 2. I thought he took a huge step back in year 3. And I don't think the stats really tell the story. I think if you're going to point at McDonald's stats, that might be a case of box score scouting. McDonald did not have a consistent year. There were far too many games when he completely disappeared. Hey, that Cleveland game was great. It was a phenomenal performance. McDonald was a big part of the Jets getting one of their 3 wins. But there were too many games where he just was not a factor. And if you're going to rebuild the defense, the Jets, look, we know the Jets need a quarterback. We know the Jets need a lot of work on the offense, but this team's not going to win with a bad defense. Look at the Cincinnati Bengals the last couple of years. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They have elite receivers. They have missed the playoffs because of a defense. Look at the Houston Texans right now. The big reason that they're in the divisional round is their defense. Offense is great. You got to have an offense. I want to have a complete team, though. I think that the debate between should we focus on offense or defense is misguided. I think you gotta have both. Now, I think it's fair to say maybe the Jets should skew a little bit more towards their offense, because even if they don't draft a quarterback this year, very likely to draft one in 2027. But you still can't have a horrible defense out there. And if you're looking to start your defense, I think you start with an edge rusher like Rueben Bain. There's another direction that I think the Jets could go. This would be kind of controversial, but I would also consider drafting Francis Mauigoa, the tackle out of Miami, with the 2nd overall pick. Now, your immediate reaction might be, John, didn't the Jets just draft tackles the last 2 years in the first round? And the answer is yes. Your next response is, John, are you saying we give up on Olu Fashanu or Armand Membu? The answer is no. Third question, John, have you lost your mind? The answer is probably, but I not in this case. Not over this. I'm not suggesting the Jets replace either of the tackles they drafted. I think that maybe you draft Mauigoa and play him at guard. Jets have a hole at guard right now. John Simpson's about to become a free agent. Now, a lot of people are going to object to the idea of drafting a guard 2nd overall. I have a couple possible responses to that. Number one, this is not a vintage draft class. This is not a class that is overflowing with talent at the premium positions. So I think that you kind of have to make exceptions in that case. Number 2 is Mauigoa is a guy who profiles somebody who has the ability to move out to tackle. You're not picking him to play guard because he doesn't have the ability to play tackle. He's a guy who I think could be a good tackle in this league. It's just you don't have an opening there. You have an opening at guard. Number 3 is nobody has an issue with drafting a defensive tackle in the top 5. So if you don't have an issue with drafting a defensive tackle in the top 5, why would you have an issue drafting the guy who blocks him? Guards are matched up against defensive tackles. There's this weird disconnect. Next thing I would say, number 4, I think guard's a premium position in this league now. It may not have been the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it may have been easy to find a guard. It's not easy to find guards anymore. Colleges are not developing offensive linemen. The most important point, though, is that this isn't just about drafting one player. This would actually be building a major strength at a critical spot on your team. Because right now, I think it's fair to say Jets offensive line, probably one of the best parts of the team. In fact, other than special teams, probably the best part of the team. But it was about a league average unit, most metrics would tell you. If you add another premium draft pick to this, and maybe even sign Tyler Linderbaum from the Baltimore Ravens, suddenly we're in the discussion for having the best offensive line in the league. And all the pieces are young. And that's the sort of offensive line that you could go into 2027 and feel really good about drafting a quarterback at that point. I would have no reservation about drafting a quarterback in 2027 if you had that sort of offensive line, because that would be dominant. That would be the kind of offensive line that could sustain an offense. That'd be the sort of offensive line that alone could help completely change the course of this franchise. It could completely change the course of this football team, could completely change the course of this offense. One draft pick alone on the offensive line isn't going to do that. But based on what you have, I think there would be a huge multiplier effect that would not be the case with most teams. With most teams, you draft a guard, it's not going to make that big of a difference. For where the Jets are, where there may be one offensive lineman away from going from an okay line to a great line, that's where I think there'd be a logic. So my early thought is those would be the two options that would make the most sense right now for the Jets. But I need to sit and think about this a little bit. I think like most of you, I'm surprised. So my mind may change on that, but that's what I think right now. And I kind of like both of these ideas. So let me know what you have to say on that. Anyway, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the quarterback position. There's going to be a real danger for the Jets to reach for a quarterback. There's also going to be a real danger for the Jets to just sit this year out at quarterback. I don't think either of these instincts is right. And I'll try and explain the contradiction as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner's a big one. Between busy workdays, cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. That's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches, with over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. Recipes are simple but feel elevated, even restaurant quality, with dishes co-created by chefs like Gordon Ramsay. And everything arrives pre-portioned, so there's less prep, less mess, and no wasted food. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and a free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We're talking about the surprising news. Dante Moore of Oregon not entering the 2026 NFL draft. Many, including myself, thought that he was very likely to be the Jets pick with the second overall selection in the 2026 draft. I thought we'd be talking about Dante Moore a lot over the next couple of months. Well, Moore is not an option now for the New York Jets. So the Jets need to come up with a plan B. What do they do in the NFL draft? And we talked about some of their options with the second overall pick. But another question is going to pop up. Should the Jets draft a quarterback in 2026? I say the answer is yes, but it's a qualified yes. I'm a big believer in the Ron Wolf method. If you're not familiar with that, Ron Wolf is a Hall of Fame executive, the guy who actually briefly worked in the Jets front office in the early 1990s. He had stints with the Raiders, stints with the Buccaneers. He was with the Jets for a bit. He ended up going to he eventually went to Green Bay, became the general manager of the Packers, rebuilt the Packers into a Super Bowl team, and ended up in the Hall of Fame. Ron Wolf's philosophy was that you draft a quarterback every year. Some years it might be the first round. Some years it might be the second round. Some years it might be the fifth round. But every single year you should draft a quarterback. You give yourself a chance to hit on a quarterback because quarterback is so essential. And I believe in that. I think that that's a great way to go. I had a number of issues with the way the Jets handled the 2025 NFL draft. One of them is that they didn't even take a lottery. They didn't even choose a lottery ticket at quarterback. Late in the season, I think the games would have been easier to take if they had a player they drafted instead of throwing undrafted Brady Cook out there. Somebody they drafted may not have played well, probably would not have played well in the infrastructure that they put out there, but probably would have had more upside than Brady Cook. So I absolutely believe the Jets should look to draft a quarterback at some point this year. I think what the danger is for the Jets would be if they believe that they had to get the guy that they view as their next franchise quarterback, though. And that might sound like a contradiction, but it's really not. I think that there's a danger in drafting somebody early for the sake of drafting a quarterback, for the sake of selling the media and the fan base on the idea we got our guy. And what I'm talking about here is maybe drafting Ty Simpson from Alabama at 16, or moving up for Ty Simpson, or moving up from the second round, from pick 33 back into round 1 to draft Ty Simpson. I think that you have to let the board come to you. And I think that at some point in the draft, it's very likely that there's going to be a quality quarterback prospect whose grade matches your pick. I'm not saying it has to be in round 2. I'm not saying it has to be round 4. I'm not saying it has to be round 5. I'm not saying it has to be round 7. At some point, it's going to make sense for the Jets to pick a quarterback. There'll be someone on your board whose grade matches where you're selecting. But I don't want to just go into the draft saying we got to get a quarterback in the first round, or we got to get a quarterback with our high second round pick, because that's where you start making mistakes. And there have been teams that have done that. It's been well publicized that there have been teams that have pretty much gone into the draft saying we have to get our quarterback this year no matter what. And that's where you run into trouble. That's what the Jets did more or less in 2021 when they felt they had to draft a quarterback to replace Sam Darnold. Now, I know there have been reports that came out that said they were happy to keep Sam Darnold. I find that tough to believe, knowing what we knew about the situation the Jets were in 2021. When the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson, they went into that draft, and this has been documented. They're on the record. Their decision makers are on the record saying that we were picking a quarterback no matter what. If Anthony Richardson went before we picked, we would have drafted Will Levis. Those are the mistakes that alter your franchise. You can always recover from the guy you don't get. The Jets aren't getting Dante Moore. And there were aspects of Dante Moore's game to really like. He's a talented guy. And there's a very good chance he's going to be a high pick in the 2027 NFL draft. And you know what? There's a real chance the Jets will take him if they're in position. Jets will have 3 first-round picks next year. So I wouldn't completely close the book on Dante Moore ending up a member of the New York Jets eventually. But you don't just take a quarterback to take a quarterback. You don't just take a quarterback. And this is something, one of my frustrations with the Jets is far too often they do things for appearances. Far too often they do things so that they can sell their vision. They can sell a vision of hope to the media and to the fans. That's not what you should do. I think Ty Simpson's a guy whose game has some big question marks. I had question marks about Dante Moore. I have even more question marks about Ty Simpson. I think that there's a point in the NFL draft where it could make sense to draft Ty Simpson. I think even the Colts pick is too early. I think even the Jets' second round pick's too early for that. Even the Dallas second round pick might be too early for that. And if they pick Ty Simpson that early, my concern is that it would be done just to say we took a quarterback, just to say now we have a franchise guy going forward. That's what you have to avoid. I think it's a good idea every year to take a shot on a quarterback at some point, because even if you get later into the draft and the odds are low, the rewards are just so great. If you find a good quarterback, if you find a guy who's a quality starter in this league, it's worth everything. It's worth so much to your franchise. It's not worth everything, but it's worth so much to your franchise. You shouldn't just take a quarterback, though, for the sake of taking a quarterback. It has to make sense. His grade and his potential have to fit where you're selecting. So I think that the worst thing the Jets could do this year would be to force a quarterback pick. That's how I felt when they were picking second overall, because part of me worried that they would force a pick of Dante Moore just to say we have a franchise quarterback. Just because Moore's gone and just because the Jets aren't picking a quarterback at 2, that doesn't mean that concern is gone. Jets need to be smart about what they're doing. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.